Welcome to the Dog Training Audio Experience Podcast. I'm your host, Erica Gonzalez. I'm a certified dog trainer and behavior consultant and the founder of From Dusk Till Dog. Before we jump into today's podcast, today's episode is brought to you by our friends at Pupford. As a dog trainer, I use and recommend training treats a lot, and some of our favorites are the freeze-dried training treats from Pupford. They are not only high value, but they're low calorie and limited ingredient, which you know I love. And if you put them on auto ship, you'll actually save 15% off. And with that, let's jump in to today's episode. Welcome. Very excited to talk about today's topic. We're going to be talking all about nervous dogs. So if you are a pet parent with a dog who suffers from some anxiety or stress or being nervous in certain situations, then this episode is for you. And to join me to talk about this topic is Liz Knight. She is a professional dog trainer and owner of Rover Rehab located in New Jersey. Welcome to the podcast, Liz. Thank you for being here.
Hi, thank you so much for having me. I'm really excited to talk about this. It's one of my favorite topics.
I really feel like anyone who's experienced having a dog, either if they have a dog that has these issues or they've been around a dog that is maybe nervous about them, I think regardless of whether you have one or been around one, you're going to get some value here. So I'm really excited to chat. So thank you. And let's jump right into it. I think before we go into specifics about what to do or how to manage it. We're going to be covering how to manage these things, confidence building stuff, tips on how to help them, advocate for them, things like that. Before we do that, I'd love to hear from you and your thoughts on just generally defining what is a nervous dog? How do we know our dogs are nervous and what can we look for?
Yeah, so I think of a nervous dog as a dog who might be classified as fearful or anxious, either sort of generally overall in their life or in response to something specific. You can have dogs that if they're quietly at home, they seem perfectly confident, but if they encounter something specific, you see more of those nervous behaviors come out. So a lot of nervous dog body language. Sometimes we think of the sort of classic scared stuff. So dogs that might tuck their tail or shake or try to hide or cower. They might pin their ears back. You can see some lip licking is another like stress signal. Panting when they aren't hot is another one. If dogs are stressed, you might see that. But some dogs that are nervous can also do some bigger behaviors. So if you have a dog that's barking or lunging or maybe even biting, if they're in a situation where they're really uncomfortable and they don't feel like they have another option. So nervous can kind of run the gamut in terms of what you're looking at. But generally I think of it as dogs who are fearful or anxious about something.
Right. And I'm glad that you covered just sometimes it's bigger looking stuff. So, just because a dog, because I think a common misconception, and you've probably heard this before, is, my dog is really confident because they're barking at everybody or lunging on the leash or whatever. And I'm like, oh, well, I know it can seem like that, but kind of the opposite most of the time. So not saying confident dogs don't ever do certain things, but I think for the most part, a lot of that does stem from uncertainty, anxiety, nervousness, unsure about the situation, et cetera. So I think it's important. It's not always the shivering little trembling dog in the corner under the couch. It's also the big dog that's lunging and perhaps barking at people or whatnot. So I think that's really important to cover that, as it is a misconception I hear a lot. Have you heard that before from people?
I have, absolutely. It's that they're barking because they're barking or sort of moving towards stuff because they feel really confident and it's more offensive. But oftentimes, even if it looks more offensive, the root of it is some kind of fear or nervousness or anxiety.
Right. That's so important to cover, as I do think that that's hard for people to understand. So I'm glad that we touched on that. And I think too, because I have with Freddie, he was nervous about a lot of things when we got him, and we've overcome a lot of those things. And he is becoming such a confident dog. So I've had to personally go through this. And I know with one of your dogs, you've gone through some of this as well, correct?
Yeah, with Molly. She was generally what you would classify as sort of reactive when she first came
Freddie
to us.
too.
So, we saw a lot of those sort of bigger behaviors, and this was before I knew enough to recognize some of the smaller ones. So I was unintentionally, putting her in situations where she felt the need to do those bigger behaviors, but it's because she was uncomfortable. Right. And she didn't know how else to express that. But, there's nothing better for me than the joy of seeing a dog who goes from being nervous or uncomfortable, and then you start to see more confidence and
come
comfort.
out. Yeah.
Yeah. It's really wonderful to watch.
It is
that.
very rewarding because I've seen Jade's been in the lap of luxury since she was a puppy. So she's just been, and I mean, I was training with her. It's why I became a trainer. So she got that from me, but Freddie just coming in way later into the game and already as an adult dog. We don't know how old he is, but he's got some grays already. So I think he's a little older than we may have thought, but having him come into the mix with so many issues, it is so rewarding to see, hey, he's feeling better about this and he's able to do that. And it is so nice. And I think one of the biggest things that I know I've done, and I recommend to clients, and I recommend when I'm giving tips out about this is, management tips. And I'm always touching, I know all dog trainers are always harping about management, and what does that mean? Right. But it's just there. I always feel like we need to be in one of two buckets at all times when we're working with nervous dogs, which is either we're managing the situation, which we're going to cover what that means, or we're training, right? We're going to cover what that means, but we have to be in one or the other, or ebbing and flowing between the two. What we can't do is not be quite managing it and not be quite training it. And then hoping for the best, because it's usually not going to go too good. So what are some management tips, and what would you define as management? How can we help our dogs that might be nervous feel a little bit better in certain situations?
Yeah. So I think of management as any kinds of things that we can do to help prevent our dogs from going, over thresholds. So hitting that point of emotional arousal where you're seeing some of those more nervous or bigger behaviors, whichever way your dog chooses to express that. And for me, it all comes back to, it's our job to keep our nervous dogs safe. So if we can implement things to help them feel a little bit more comfortable by reducing their stimulation with things that are going to set them off. So I, for example, recently started using window film in my house to block off some of the access. We have a big bay window in the front of the house, and every time the mail delivery person would come up, they were right there on our porch, and Molly was right there. And that was a really difficult situation for her. So using window film has helped to block some of that visual stimulation, which is a great management tool for a lot of dogs. Other things that I might use for management for nervous dogs are things like a white noise machine, if you have a dog that responds fearfully to sound. And then using some things like, keeping them out of situations that are going to make them uncomfortable. So if you have a dog that is really fearful in crowds, don't take them to crowded spots. That falls under management, right? If you have a dog that gets really uncomfortable when people come to the front door, you can use a pet gate to keep them from being able to run right up to the door and, have that sort of startle. And another thing that I always like to bring up to people if they have a dog that's really nervous is if your dog is really uncomfortable and struggles with specific situations that are, kind of unavoidable. So maybe it's sounds in your neighborhood that you can't quite cover. It's always a good thing to talk to either your veterinarian or to a veterinary behaviorist and see if medication might be an option to help reduce some of that anxiety while you're working on those other things.
I'm so glad you brought up behavior medication, because I feel like that is kind of taboo sometimes for a lot of people. And I want to go back to everything else you just said, but that just struck me. And I was like, yes, because, I do think, and I want for those listening to hear that there's nothing wrong with it. You haven't failed at anything. It shouldn't be even looked at. I think it's important to say it should not be looked at as a last resort either. I think a lot of times people do look at it as, I'll do everything possible to avoid. And yeah, of course, we want to try to hash out the training and go through some behavior modification and see how that pans out a little bit. But if your dog's under chronic stress, like you just said, it's unavoidable. It's stuff in like several times a day, every day. You can't get away from it. Yeah, we should be looking into ways to helping our dogs cope a little bit better, or sometimes a lot better, depending on some of how the medication works. It's just like with people. I always say, if I have anxiety, which I do, if I could go and see my therapist and work through some things. And luckily that works for me, but I have plenty of friends who do that and they need behavior medication because they need something to help get them to the next level, help them get to a better quality of life. And I think quality of life is a big topic that we could probably have a whole nother episode on, but I think that's a whole nother beast. But, I think behavior meds are such an important part of a training program. If we feel like the dog really is under chronic stress and is nervous all the time or frequently or repetitively every day, that's definitely something to look into. So I'm so glad that you brought that up. And I love window film. I went like this. For those just listening, I was pumping my arms up and down. Because window film's so awesome. And I've had so many people, and I know you firsthand, and me, luckily, my dogs are either can't reach the window area too well. So that's working to my benefit. Or I have, they don't go for the blinds that much. So I can kind of just fan the bottom ends of the blinds so that they just can't see, but I still have the sunlight. But things like that really help. And I have something that is a gem and I want to share it. So we have a lot of deliveries here. Okay. We have Amazon, everybody coming, and, UPS, everybody dropping packages off at our door. And so it's every day, multiple times. So this would be a frequent trigger for the dogs, and they would knock, obviously. Or they would like throw the package depending on who's dropping it off, and it was loud and the dogs would bark and go off, 10 times a day sometimes. And so I bought this thing online, and it's a little door, like a do not disturb kind of doorknob thing at a hotel, but it's sturdy for outdoor use. And it says something like, Lord knows, I'm not going to remember now, but it says something like, please do not ring bell or knock, leave package at front, protective dogs.
Yep. I love that.
Like nobody's knocked on my door in like 1 year. It's amazing.
That's nobody. A beautiful thing.
I'm like, this is the best $6 I've ever spent. So, there's things like that, window film and signs and all sorts of stuff that you could do to help manage. And I think management's so important before you even go into the training stuff or what you're going to do hands-on wise. Management Absolutely. Has to come first. Would you agree?
Absolutely. And I love the idea of doing a sign. I've seen some other people do that too. And it ends up tying into training, because you can even have, a sign on your door that says, hey, if you're arriving as a guest, please don't knock, please don't ring the doorbell, please text me to let me know that you're here. Right. And that also gives you a really good opportunity to sort of coach the people on whatever you might need on the training side, while also implementing some management of not having those sounds that might put your dogs, into a nervous or scared or reactive state. Right from the get-go.
Yeah. Some instructions always helpful, I think, for everybody. So it kind of sets everyone up for success. So those were great management tips. I think that's great. Gates, crates, leashes, having treats nearby, having stuff, puzzle toys and enrichment stuff for your dog to do.
Oh yeah.
A room, a puppy proofed or dog proofed playpen or gated area or bedroom or whatever you got to do to move the chess pieces around as you see fit, depending on the situation. So great stuff there, Liz. And so going in, so we got the management down. I think that's pretty understandable for people, set your dog up to not rehearse the behaviors that we're looking to not have, and also not feeling uncomfortable and all of that. What are some tips you would give people, or exercises or thoughts? And I know there's so many different avenues where dogs could get nervous. So we can narrow this down to like an example that you've seen recently or that you deal with a lot with clients, whether that's people coming in or seeing other dogs out and about and things like that. What are some exercises or tips you would give someone in some of those specific situations?
Yeah. So the first sort of training exercise is one that I know that you also are a fan of, which is teaching a touch cue. So teaching a hand target.
Love it.
That little nose boop onto the hand.
Scientific term, boop.
Boop, exactly.
I always say that.
But I love that one because it's so versatile.
Right.
And especially for dogs who might be nervous, it can become a really good way of teaching them a happy, fun, comfortable way to move away from things.
Right.
You know, many of us who have nervous dogs, especially nervous dogs who might react in a bigger way, but also nervous dogs who might, you know, freeze. We don't want to have to be dragging them away from something that's stressful for everyone. So
Yeah.
Teaching a touch cue is a really nice way of, you know, telling them, hey, let's change direction. Let's move you away from this thing, but let's do it in a way that's fun. You know, you don't have to physically then touch them or pull on them to get them to move. And it also, I like it because it gives them some choice too, which is another sort of thing is dogs, if you want to help to build their confidence a little bit, giving them some choices is always a great option. But giving them a choice that, hey, you know, you can choose this other option of coming and booping my hand with your nose. And that's going to be more comfortable for you than being in whatever position you are right now.
I love the touch cue, and I actually did a whole episode with Michelle from Thunder Dogs on touch. So if anyone wants to know what touch, all about touch, definitely check that out. But yeah, touch is one of my favorite cues for all sorts of the good news is not only will this help your nervous dog, but this can help across the board. I was telling a student yesterday that, hey, you can use this to remove a dog off a couch if your dog gets weirded out with getting physically kind of pushed off the couch, which is kind of rude. And dogs get uncomfortable with that sometimes and might lash back out at us for doing that. So you can use it for so many different things. And I'm glad that you brought that up because that's a fun and pretty easy one for most dogs. Maybe not all dogs, but I think most dogs pick that up pretty quick.
Yeah. And that's the other thing I like about it too, is that it gives some sort of easy wins for a dog that might be a little more uncomfortable when you're teaching touch, because you can set it up so that anything they do moving remotely closer to or acknowledging that your hand exists can be rewarded. So it's a nice way of building up some confidence too for dogs of like, hey, you're going to get a bunch of wins in a row. And that feels pretty good.
Yeah. I know. I feel good when I get a couple wins in a row. So it's really no different than us at the end of the day with setting up, you know, having some wins. It starts making you feel a little better about the day, about the week. So is there some other things like kind of honing in on building confidence? Is there other things maybe outside of that situation, in that type of situation, any other things you would recommend or think about in terms of confidence boosting exercises?
Yeah. So sort of the ones that I always turn to are, again, this is another one that I know that you love, which is enrichment in general.
Oh, yes. I had a note about this because I was like, we got to touch on enrichment. Love it.
So I love using enrichment, especially for nervous dogs, specifically using food enrichment if they're, you know, comfortable taking food sort of generally in life.
Right.
You know, because I love seeing dogs learn to sort of problem solve. You can use it to help them get more comfortable with sort of novel objects. If you're using puzzle toys, you can even do DIY ones that are great. You know, cardboard boxes always get a second life in my house.
Oh yeah.
As enrichment.
Same here.
But it's great for giving them some confidence boosting in terms of problem solving, controlling sort of sounds and movement. And also, you know, enrichment that's fun. It's kind of hard to be both playful and nervous at the same time.
Right.
So building in some playful, fun activities is one of my favorite things. And then, you know, on a sort of also enrichment note, because it's still giving access to, you know, sniffing and all that kinds of stuff, decompression walks again.
Yay. Yeah. My favorite.
Yeah.
That's such a big one. I feel like people don't realize that can really impact your dog, especially if they're nervous.
Absolutely. Yeah. And, you know, I know there was a study, it was either last year or the year before, that dogs who had more access to sniffing had reduced cortisol rates and reduced heart rates, which, you know, if you have a dog that's nervous, even if you think about it as a person, if your heart rate is really high and you're feeling really stressed, finding things that are relaxing for you feels wonderful.
Yes.
And for dogs, sniffing is one of those things that can help with that. So decompression walks are great for giving them access to sniffing, giving them access to choice again, where they can choose, obviously within reason, we're still keeping them safe, but they can choose where to walk, where to sniff, what to explore. And that's another one that's really fun to see dogs who aren't quite sure what to do out in the world. Their confidence goes up as they start to learn that exploring is fun and exploring is a nice thing to do.
That is I'm so preach it. Decompression walks are at pretty much the top of my list when I talk to pretty much anybody about any situation. I feel like as trainers, it's something we recommend to every case, whether it is, a dog that's just learning basic skills or whether it's a dog that has aggression issues. Across the board, this is going to help your dog. Again, like you said, within reason, we're keeping them safe. We're not just letting them run off leash into the oblivion and we don't know what's going on. But because I think sometimes it's looked upon as we're just like letting the dog do everything. Yeah, I want to give my dogs as much freedom and choice as possible, but we do want to keep them safe and be respectful of where we're at and all of that. But I think with the sniffing and things like that, I think it's very much like breathing exercises or just having, whatever it is that helps calm us down, whether that's yoga or working out or reading a book. Like dogs don't have those things. They don't have those other options. They can't see a therapist or watch a nice movie or call a friend to vent. They have us. And so we have to give them something to help them decompress, which is why we call it that. So I love that. I think enrichment's so important because even figuring out, and I've had even with Jade when I first got her the Kong Wobbler, which is one of the enrichment toys I love. It's very big staple. We all have it. And I remember the first few weeks that I presented that to her, she was very like, I don't know what this is. I'm not really super interested. I could tell she was actually a little bit nervous about the new object on the floor that was bopping around and wiggling around on the floor by itself every time she went up to it. So I could tell that worried her. But as we took it very slow, and then a couple weeks later, now she bats it around like it's nobody's business. And just that's a confidence boost. It's something I wasn't sure about. And now I've conquered and I could do it all day long, super happy. Even that tiny little bit of figuring out a puzzle toy and getting that win, like you said, is so, so great for dogs. They're going to help them feel better. I think too, speaking of boxes, I think a good thing is like shaping. So, and shaping is just kind of like, I don't know, a fancy, not really fancy, but like a professional terminology. But basically what you could do to shape something like this is, let's say your dog's a little unsure about the box. Get a really tiny box or maybe half the box or cut the box up and have a piece of it on the floor. Start easy, but you can just mark with either a clicker or mark your dog for looking at it, for walking up to it, for interacting with it at all. And I know a lot of us have seen that turn into the dogs like jumping into the box and doing all sorts of stuff. Like, wow, well, interacting with this is getting me rewards. So let me interact more. So again, you could take something that seems kind of boring or sometimes nerve-wracking for the dog and then have them interact with it a lot more. So I think shaping is really good, or like trick training or just training in general. Just training skills.
It's funny that you brought up boxes because my sister actually has a nervous dog that she's been working with him for the last year and he's come so far. It's wonderful. But great. He is initially very afraid of boxes specifically. And so we started with a box that was flattened on the floor, just a flat piece of cardboard. And the thing that I love most about shaping is that for me, it's really fun to sort of think about, all right, what's the final step that we're looking to achieve? And then let's break that down into little tiny pieces and see what the smallest pieces that we can start with that our dog is comfortable with.
Right.
And then you can go back and think about, okay, well, day one, he wasn't even comfortable with a flat box on the floor. And now he'll stick his head in a full box for his breakfast,
Right. It's come a long way for sure.
Yeah. But I love that, thinking about splitting things into smaller bits to make it more manageable for our dogs and then seeing how much more confident they become.
Micro steps is always, I'm like, listen, there's macro stuff, but dog training, especially behavioral work, or if you have a dog that is nervous about something, or you're dealing with a dog that has anxiety or generalized anxiety, it's micro steps, baby. And we want to take big steps, and I get it, but micro steps is where it's at. That's where you're going to get the real work is going to be done in those little baby steps. So I'm glad that you touched on that as well. And I think too, for those listening, just training, if you have a dog who's nervous and maybe, sitting down and thinking, hey, have we taught the dog some basic skills? And I'm saying, I want to caveat this by saying, having quote unquote obedience style training of, we're doing lie down and we're doing go to place. And does that necessarily coincide with your dog feeling better that they're nervous about new people coming into the house? No, but I will say that there's value in doing that on the back end so that you have a list of things you can communicate with your dog when they are maybe feeling a little bit whatever. So let's say the dog learns that running to their bed and lying down is the best thing on the planet. I use this a lot in my house. And if they love doing that, and we've rewarded it heavily with food and toys and other stuff that they like, what can happen is if someone's coming in and your dog's, feeling maybe a little unsure and we don't want to do this when they're leaping at somebody or really, really uncomfortable. But let's say you have a little bit of a nervous Nelly and maybe you can have them go to their place and they go, oh, I know how to do that. And that might make them feel a lot better. So they're like, I know how to do that thing. And at least now we have a way to communicate. So I feel like having some basic skills, some basic communication with your dog is going to be huge across the board, but definitely with nervous dogs.
Absolutely. And I think there's also some great value in, when we're the beauty of using positive reinforcement training, right, is that we build up these fun, nice feelings in our dogs. Mm-hmm. And if they know that running to their bed makes them feel good.
Yeah.
If we can then pair that fun, feel good activity with something they might be a little bit unsure of, I think there's a lot of value in putting those things together and having dogs learn, okay, that thing's a little weird. I'm not really sure about it. But every time that thing appears, something that I like happens. Right. Something that I already have a positive association with happens. So even though it might just look like, oh, we're just asking our dog to go lay on a bed, if we're tying it into all of this other, it might sound a little hooey, but all this feel good stuff, because that's really what it is.
Yeah.
I think that that's totally transferable to then helping them learn that, oh, this thing that might be kind of weird isn't so bad, because it means that other things that I like happen.
Right. I think too, and I know we can do a whole nother episode on how to treat some of these nervous things, because there's so many contexts. There's other dogs and there's people and there's children and there's the garbage can that moves and the vacuum and the mail person. And, there's a million, we would need to talk for 3 hours about how to address all that. So I think some of these management and basic kind of things to work on can help people generally. And I think too, whatever, to your point, whatever your dog's nervous about, if we can keep them safe, have a good distance away from it, have your dog where they know it's maybe around, they're aware it might be in the environment, but we're not so close to it or so involved with it that they're already overwhelmed and upset and nervous. If we can start pairing it with positive stuff, whether that's food or playtime or a toy they really like, or increasing the distance or whatever it is that we can help them understand, hey, when that comes around, good stuff happens for you. You're benefiting from this being around, from this happening, from this occurring. That's a great general viewpoint to look at it and say, okay, that's generally what we want to go for. Is seeing dogs makes me nervous, but now I get chicken every time dogs are around in the distance. So I don't think dogs are so bad after a while. So I think pairing it with positive stuff, and that is the glory and the benefit of doing positive training, because even if you don't do it perfect, even if you're not a dog trainer level of timing and all this stuff, it's still there isn't a negative, right? There's not this negative side effect to, trying to help your dog feel better there by giving them something and playing with them or trying to redirect. So I think that's so important to mention that, because positive training is always a win, in my opinion. There's no real downfall to trying that out. And even if you're not perfect with it, the benefit is that it's not, nothing bad's going to happen if you do it wrong, except your dog's like, I got a treat. I'm not sure why, but at least I got one, and it's still not bad, so trying this out, if you're trying this for the first time at home, or you're curious where to start, just get out there and try. And again, I think too, it's good to say, this is reminding me, it's always good to hire a qualified positive reinforcement trainer if you're not sure, or you really feel your dog really needs some help. There's definitely hire a professional, because they'll tell you how to do it properly, and then you'll know.
Yeah. So. And a lot of the time I find too, even when people are trying it at home and they aren't quite sure, there's always something about it that they're on the right track.
Right.
So we can tweak stuff a little bit, and but at least when you're starting out on the right track, that's nice for humans to feel that way too, of like, okay, I wasn't totally
I wasn't totally wrong. That's true.
But people are often, even if they're just trying on their own with doing positive training, they're trying something right, and we can tweak stuff and, help to get them even further. But there's having a dog that's nervous and just waiting to correct them for it and tell them they're wrong doesn't actually teach them anything, and it doesn't help them to adjust their feelings about whatever it is in a good way, So using throwing some extra treats at it is not going to hurt. And
yes, I'm glad that you brought that up too, because I understand some of this can be frustrating when we have nervous dogs. They are
absolutely
reacting. These are sometimes really difficult times for pet parents at home. They just adopted a dog, or they just got a puppy, and there's all these problems, and it can be overwhelming for people. And I totally get it, that it's frustrating at times and disappointing. And sometimes we're angry, and we're having a day, and we're over thresholds, and we can't deal with much else. And, I totally get it. But to your point, if your dog already feels nervous, adding negativity to that is not going to make your dog get better now and feel better about the dog across the street or the person coming in. Now it just feels like you're also upset that that's all around, and they get in trouble when these things come about, and it's just furthering a negative association. So I think that's great that we touched on that. But, I think
it always makes me think of the quote. I don't remember who said it, but I see it around all the time of, remember that your dog isn't giving you a hard time. Your dog is having a hard time.
Right.
And sometimes it's helpful for even me some days, if I'm having a bad day and Molly starts barking incessantly at something out the window and I feel frustrated, it's helpful to remember, she's not giving me a hard time. It's not personal.
Right.
She's having a hard time, and she's trying to tell me that. So I think that's helpful for us to help to tap into that empathy side. That is so important, especially when living with a nervous dog.
That is awesome. Empathy is so big for me in my life in general. And I think as trainers, it's something we try to educate people on tapping into that, because dogs need empathy and compassion, especially if you have a nervous dog or behavioral issues with your dog. We need as much empathy as possible to stay in a place where we can guide them appropriately. Otherwise, it's like, if you're, and I think benevolent leadership, if you will, like we talk about being our dog's pet parents, and we do have to kind of guide them there and help lead them to a better place. It's our job as their parents to do that. And I think, if we're all flustered and upset, we're not going to be doing a good job of helping others and leading them to the next successful place that they should be at. So it's just like, if you think of at work, if you've had a boss, or you've had somebody, or even in a relationship, if you had somebody that's not being so kind to you about how to do the things we need to do together here, you're not going to be super thrilled. You're not going to get there. So I think leading with compassion and empathy is going to be a big step. And I always say, we're all working on something. Okay. We're all working on something here. Nobody's perfect. We all got crap. We all have problems. We're all trying to work it out. We all have crappy days. So, give some grace where we can. And that's a great quote. One of my favorites. And I think in terms of empathy, touching on that, I think this is such a great thing to hit on here too with this discussion on being advocates for our dogs and dogs in general, but obviously, especially for nervous dogs, as their pet parents, as the person that's guiding them through the world and helping them. What are some things we should be doing to help advocate for our nervous dogs, in your opinion? What are some things that you would recommend?
So I will give a brief anecdote on my own part, which is that I'm a very non-confrontational person. I would much prefer to avoid conflict at all costs. But I will say that being the guardian to a dog who can be more nervous, I've had to learn how to advocate for her by using my voice. So, saying, hey, she doesn't actually want to be pet by a stranger. Please give us some space. Saying, yeah, it's great that we want her to come join us at a big family event, but she's not going to be comfortable. So she's going to stay home, and that's okay. Right. So a lot of it is about using our own voice to recognize what our dogs are comfortable with and what they aren't. Even with things like if you have people over and that your dog is not going to be comfortable in a large group or even a small group, depending on your dog. I've had people say, oh, well, just let me go say hi, let me go say hi, let me go say hi. And it's important for us to advocate for, that's not something that's going to work for us today. Thank you for asking. Right. But she's more comfortable, in another room with a Kong or whatever it may be. Yeah. Which can be hard when people often are very well-meaning about it. They're not trying to make your dog uncomfortable. Yeah. It's just, they want to say hi to your dog. It's a very human thing. But sometimes, using our own voice to say, not today, not right now is really, really important for helping our dogs stay comfortable and helping them know that they're safe when we're around.
Yeah, I think safety is a big issue with this, with nervous dogs, because if we don't advocate, if we don't say not today, then your dog's going to let them know not today. Right. So it's either you pick it, folks, if it's either you say it or your dog's going to say it. And then, we don't want the dog needing to say it. Right. So I think for most people and this goes for if you're the person saying, let me pet your dog, and the dog looks like they're not interested, or the pet parent saying, no, thank you, not today. We need to respect that. And it's not, back to it not being personal. It's not personal against the neighbor we're saying no to, or the small child that's wanting to run up to our dog. Right. That's like, and you're like, sorry, kid. I've told many gorgeous, adorable little children no, because even though it kills me and I've ruined their day in that moment that they can't touch the puppy or they can't touch the dog. I mean, we have to be the ones, right? If we're not doing it, who's going to do it? So we have to be the ones saying something. And although I'm, I don't look for confrontation, I'm much more comfortable in it just with the nature of my life so far, I guess. But, I rather avoid it. But I've had to, even in the beginning, I remember my first couple big leash reactive cases when I was like first couple months out of school and trying to do dog training, right? We all go back to those first couple clients. We're like, oh boy, and I did really well, but I know a lot more now 10 years later. But, it's, I remember it was this huge leash reactive dog, and I had to say something to the people coming up, and I felt really uncomfortable saying something. You feel bad for the person. You don't want to disappoint the stranger, and right. You're not. And I'm always telling clients that struggle. We've all been there. We all struggle with having this weird confrontation, not a negative one, but it is a confrontation by nature to say no. I say, hey, and I made a quote, a meme about this at one point because I loved something I said at some point and I had to remember it, but it was, don't appease a stranger at the cost of your dog's well-being.
Yes, I love that.
And I'm like, listen, I say that to everybody because it's so true. You're never going to see this person again. And if you are, you can explain it to them if it's your neighbor at another time. But these strangers that are coming, going, you don't owe them anything. You don't owe them to pet your dog or to come up. What you owe is your dog. You owe your dog who's part of your family and going home with you tonight about how they're going to feel there. So we need to advocate. And by the way, too, if for those that may feel really uncomfortable with this, some other things you can do, get a little harness patch that says do not pet or I need space, or a leash, or both. Because people, as many signs as we can give folks, it's best. Little bandanas. I know I have one for Jade, even though she loves people, but I'll tell you right now, sometimes I'm walking around somewhere pre times we're in now, or, we're outside, there's a lot of people or whatever.
The before times.
And, and I didn't want people like coming up and kind of interrupting, or we were training and I was trying to do stuff with her. And I got a bandana that just says like, I'm working, please give us space, or something like that. Like, we're training, we're working right now. And that helped a lot. So if you could get some visual help as well, that might be collars, harnesses, leashes, bandanas, stuff you can wear. I'm training my dog on the back, please leave us alone, or whatever.
That's what I was going to say. Shirts for people too are helpful.
Yeah. Rock a uniform. I need space with my dog.
Right.
So I think that's really great. And advocacy for dogs really does come with our voice, right? We have to speak up. Dogs can't speak, so we have to speak for them as best as we can. Right. And I think moving on to my last point with this, I think acceptance, we're going to move on to the next phase, is acceptance. We're managing, we're trying to train, we're trying to advocate, but we also, at some points for certain dogs, and at some level, Lord knows dogs are accepting of our stuff all the time and very forgiving and very understanding. But there's a level of acceptance we need for dogs, and expectations and understanding and things like that. So what are your thoughts on acceptance with our dogs? Because I feel there's things with Freddie, there's things with Jade. They are who they are. We've trained a lot. They're very well trained dogs. I know your dogs are, otherwise we'd suck at our jobs, but we're all doing good here. But, they have stuff, and there's things I avoid, or things I choose to opt out of, like you were saying, family parties or engagements, or going out somewhere where it might be loud, or, I do have them miss out on some things because I know it's to their benefit. So I accept some of those traits for who they are. And I think that's important. What are your thoughts on the acceptance point with that?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think it's really important to, meet our dogs where they're at in whatever point they're at, and there's some stuff that you can work on. There's some stuff that I prioritize working on in training, and there's some stuff that I don't necessarily.
Agree.
There are things that I'm like, I don't need to focus on that right now. Management is perfectly perfect right now.
Yeah. Like that's all we need. That's okay.
And that's okay. And, I think sometimes it is hard. And I went through this too, of you get a dog and you sort of have this picture of what your life with the dog is going to be. And it doesn't, if your dog is not at this point in their lives comfortable and capable of doing all of those things, that can be hard for us to reconcile as people. There is a little bit of grief associated with that, and some frustration of, well, I can't, maybe my dog can't go everywhere with me and be at the beach and go to big parties and go to, walks through crowded parts of town. But also that's okay. And I think learning to normalize that, I don't know if you follow Tales of Connection on Instagram, but they have a normalize imperfect dogs. And I love that, because at the end of the day, no dog is perfect. I'll put that in quotes, and striving for some picture of perfection is only going to, I think, be frustrating for us, and maybe put our dogs in situations that they're not prepared for. So, normalize the fact that dogs are imperfect, meet them where they're at. Molly is probably never going to be a life of the party dog who's going to be really happy at an event with 20 people, 30 people, 40 people. Buck would be living his best life. My other dog, he would be like, this is where all my new friends are. This is great. But they're different in that respect. And that's perfectly okay.
Yeah. And I think too, bringing it to people, we all have that friend that doesn't really like the whole party and is like from a distance, like, hi. And they don't really want to come up and hug you, even though we can't do any of that now anymore, but maybe one day again, but we have that friend that's kind of like the little wave at a distance, leaves after an hour, doesn't really want to be there. And then we have the friend that's like, hey, wanting to join the life of the party, which is like your other dog. And, you know, I think with just like we have grace with our friends, our family members, our kids, you know, I have 4 stepchildren. They're all completely different from one another. And, you know, they all came from the same people, and they lived up and they lived in the same environment growing up, and they had the same conditions, but they all come out different. And I think dogs, we need to, in the same way, need to look at them as individuals. Mm-hmm. And your dog might not like big parties, and they might like, you know, they might like the beach if no one's around and you kind of go on an off time. And maybe your other dog, you know, we all have strengths and areas where we really would prefer to opt out of, and that's totally okay. And yes, normalize imperfection. We do with humans, mm-hmm. and we need to, I think, raise that point to our dogs as well, as having a quote unquote bomb-proof dog, which in the dog world is like a dog that loves everybody and loves every dog and loves the kids and loves noises, mm-hmm. and loves fireworks and loves the loud motorcycle and is great off leash and great on leash. And I mean, yeah, are there a small percentage of dogs that are like that out there? Yes. But that is the exception, not the rule.
The rule. Right. So and I think that's the big thing, is there is this perception that every dog should just come like that.
Beautiful. Yeah. Loving it.
And, you know, that isn't how it works.
That's not life.
That's not how people are either. We don't just exist being totally fine and comfortable with everything. So recognizing that same thing in your dogs. And I love that you put it like, you know, having grace for them, and because we love them just the same, you know, we don't love people any less if they have something they're uncomfortable with.
Exactly.
We love our dogs. We love them for who they are. And, you know, obviously, like you said, there are some things that we can work on in training. Mm-hmm. There's some things that training might get us so far, and then there's a limit to that, and that's okay too. You know,
that's important too, I think, because with training, it seems like, well, how quickly are we going to get to the party scene? It's like, well, we might not ever get there.
Right.
I mean, we're going to get better. Hopefully we're going to improve upon this. But like you said, sometimes there's a plateau. We mm-hmm. reach the end. We've reached the end level. And, you know, I had a client once that wanted to get there, and her dog had a lot of anxiety. Probably one of the dog's amazing. Dog's very smart. Dog can do a million things, but had one of the worst cases of 5 different types of anxiety things going on, and on behavioral meds, everything, and still having a very difficult time with a lot of different stuff. Excelling in everything we did with training and all that, but having anxiety, right? If you live with anxiety, you could try your damnedest to get to a perfect place where you never, it's like asking a therapist, when's my anxiety going to be over? It's like, maybe never, probably never, but we learn to manage it a little bit better, and we avoid things that trigger us, et cetera, et cetera. So I think it's everything we just covered. And I think, you know, normalizing that and saying, hey, our dogs have stuff, we have stuff, and we need to just work around it and try to make the best life that we can with them, and embrace your dog for their quirks and for their little things. And
absolutely,
and just trying to embrace it, because fighting it or trying to feel like they need to get to a place where they're a social butterfly in all situations, you're going to be probably left disappointed. And I'm all for having ambitions and trying to help our dogs. And some dogs can overcome a lot. But if you can't, and if you feel like you've exhausted all of that, go, hey, buddy, we got to this point, we did it, and I'm okay here. And that there's nothing wrong with that. So hug your dog if they like being hugged, and give them a treat for us. And I think this is a great talk. I'm so glad that we got to cover some of these things. I know all of us have either been around or have a dog who's been nervous or have anxiety about something. So I think this will be very helpful for them. And Liz, let those listening, where can they connect with you?
Yeah, so I am Rover Rehab NJ on all of the platforms that I'm on. So Instagram, Facebook, roverrehabnj.com is my website. And then roverrehabnj@gmail.com is my email if people wanted to get in touch with me that way. So Makes it easy to remember when they're all the same.
I know. I felt very good when none of my my business name had no one else had it on any other platform. I'm like, oh, thank God, it'll just be the same. So yeah, so Rover Rehab NJ is where you can reach Liz. And again, thank you so much for coming on today, Liz. I really appreciate your insight and all of your expertise on this.
This was so fun. Like I said, I love talking about nervous dog stuff. So thank you so much for having me. This was great.
Awesome. Thanks again, Liz. And again, remember, treat yourself and treat your dogs.